to the masters, which is a really wonderful perspective to have. And these folks I've known for many, many years, so they come with that amount of years of experience in collecting art, cultivating it, and going about it very deliberately with a mission and a purpose. So before I introduce our guests, well, I'll do that first. First, I have Dr. Daryl Atwell, Sherry Bellamy-Bombre, Sharon Burton, Dr. Diane Whitfield-Locke, and Patricia Walters. Yes. So I'm going to do a very brief presentation. It's an abbreviated version of, oops, cell phone's off. It is an abbreviated version of the presentation that I did for the 30 Americans, which was part of the Corcoran exhibition and collaboration with Howard University. So, okay, I'm technically challenged. You all know that Alex is the IT person around here, so I think this is how this clicker works. So, I am going to talk just very briefly about cultural cultivation and preservation, the categories of art collectors, and the influences on the African American art market. So cultivating your collection. So collecting with a purpose. Why people collect? For cultural preservation, personal connectivity, pride and ownership. It enhances the quality of life. It's wealth building. Art is an appreciable asset. It's gratifying, intellectually stimulating experience, and part of building your own legacy. Now these bullet points come from conversations I've had with my clients, with collectors. And so this is kind of a synopsis of the reasons that they've conveyed to me why it's important that they collect African American art, and African art, I should say, as well. So here, we're going to hear what Diane Locke has to say.
One of the routes in which museums obtain art is through gifting. And gifting is a very important part that I don't know how well African Americans are aware of the fact that in order to get your favorite artist into a museum, one method is to give to the institution. And I feel that this is part of my legacy, and our legacy is it's our legacy. This is our heritage. If we do not invest in it, who's going to invest in it? And then one thing about Washington, and I was talking to one of the new auction houses that moved to the area. Sloan has moved here, and I was like, wow, they were only in New York and LA, and they chose to come to Washington, and that tells you a lot about the happenings in Washington as far as art is concerned.
So I'm going to talk about the categories of art collectors. So first, most collectors begin as novice collectors. They go about it with the purpose of just filling their wall space, and they really don't have any focus. They're kind of just all over the map, you know, in their approach to buying art. And then we have the casual category of collector, the person who buys on occasion anywhere between 1 to 5 works of art per year, and they slowly begin to visit galleries and museums, you know, just out of curiosity. And then we have the avid collector. You see, we become a little bit more mature, a little bit more focused, a little bit more deliberate in the approach. You've defined your aesthetic. You may purchase anywhere from 5 to 10 works per year. You are well informed at this point in the process, and you begin to pal up with other collectors. So you may have become a member of a collectors group. And then there's the master collector. And I'll share with you the words of Walter O. Evans, who's a very well-known art collector. I believe he's in Atlanta. And he states, "I get a joy out of tracing the items down. The rarity of it. I want to own it." That may be selfish, but that's what makes me a collector, not an investor. I want to invest in my culture. Culture defines a people, and art is a significant part of that definition, like music and literature. And you can interpret this picture one of two ways. Either that's the master collector in pursuit of another work of art, or that's and I'm talking about the cheetah being the master collector, or the master collector is getting ready to get rid of another collector that's trying to get in their way. So, at the master collector's point, you become more of a connoisseur, well-informed in your approach, in your focus. And you purchase with more of an intent that you may have before. You purchase with the intent to build a museum quality collection, loan artwork to public museums, establish a private museums, which many African American collectors have done. You create educational materials, brochures, and catalogs, because to date our artists are still underrepresented by academia. They continue to write about the same artists over and over again, and many of those, there are many artists, which I call hidden masters, who are not documented in their lifetime and continue to be left out of the books. And so that's very problematic, and that is the reason that the master collectors are so important to our culture, because they seek out those beyond what have been given, those who have been given credit, because they know a deeper history, because these people were in our communities. And they donate artwork, going back to our list here, and they work with a professional team. And if you were not here at our last tea, you really missed something special. Larry Frazier was a part of the panel discussion. We had 2 museum directors here and an appraiser, and I believe, yes, the director from the Baltimore Museum of Art and the director from the Reginald Lewis Museum. It was off the hook. All right? Yes. Preach, amen, y'all missed something. Okay? That's all I got to say. I was just moderating it, you know. I was like, wow, this is just amazing. It really was. All right, so moving on. So this is a little guy who says, you know, there's this little, most people don't know this, but I'm going to take you out through it anyway. There's this Capital One commercial with this little baby in the high chair that's always saying, no. So, okay, so that's your little baby. And that baby represents the museum that you think you're going to leave your work to and you haven't established a relationship with them. No, you can't do that. And that's why it's so important to know people like Larry, Alva Binder, the museum directors, and myself. You need to work with a team so that you are not disappointed and your treasures don't end up in the trash. I can't tell you how many times I've encountered collectors who have bought a piece at a yard sale or threw a piece away, and I saw some evidence of it in their collection. It's like, you did what with your Charles White? Well, I didn't like it, so I threw it in the garbage because I needed to make room for this poster. So we have to stop doing that to ourselves. So in your estate planning, these are some of the ways in which you can bequeath your collection. And I'm serious. I know you think I'm kidding, but I'm serious about that, what I just said. You can bequeath your collection to your family members, to public institutions, but you need to know the mission of those institutions, which was demonstrated in our last tea. The condition of the work is so important. And you can also set up an endowment. Why? Because, you know, it is very expensive to care for art. And many museums turn works away, not because they don't want them, because they can't afford to pay for them. And this is especially true for our historical Black institutions. Universities, just go down the list. So think about that in your estate planning. And for philanthropic endeavors, which my good client here, Rose Harper, is known for. She has, and continues to work in South Africa, has a really important and fine collection of works by South African artists. And at times we have conducted fundraisers to support, financially support nonprofit organizations in South Africa. And you are able to do that too. If there's a piece that you no longer love, then donate it to a nonprofit organization that's seeking to have an auction or something and help enrich them. And you get a tax write-off for that. So that's why you got to talk to Larry. All right, moving on. So market influences. The greatest influences to the marketplace are people like you. I mean, we have the art dealers and the galleries because we set the trends. People look to who the galleries are showing, who the museums are buying. But the collectors really have the greatest influence because you drive the market. I can present someone. I mean, the museums don't sell, but they influence by the fact that they're presenting an artist. But if you, the collectors, aren't buying the work, then it's for naught. And we know how artists come and go. And so this speaks to why some go with less success than others. Because the collectors, it just wasn't something that they appreciated. So it goes, they don't rise in their careers. Of course, it's your acquisitions that influence that. Collectors compete with the museums. And Sherry knows that because she bought a very important Palmer Hayden piece here seconds before the museum director of the BMA asked for it. And as I was putting the red dart on it, she was like, but I want it. I said, you have to talk to her because she just bought it. So master collectors, for the most part, but other collectors of contemporary artists' works as well, compete with museums for the finest works. And you influence the museums through your positions on acquisition boards and through your donations. Because then the artist can say, I'm a permanent part of the museum's collection. Because again, museums have their criteria by which they take on an artist's work or not. And you as a board member can say, especially for African American art and African art, sit on the boards if you're asked and try as best you can to influence our artists being in those permanent collections of those museums. So museums and why? This is why the museum's influence is so important to the marketplace. Because they influence the market. It's the authenticity and the credibility of the artist and the work. And again, the collectors follow the museum's trends. And Swans, I'm sure that all of you have heard of them, or most of you have. Right now, they have the greatest influence on African American art. And Bonhams is on their tail. They are getting ready to, and this is part of what Diane was saying in her piece, is that they're getting ready to open a location in DC. And think about the history of African American art. Most of those artists that are auctioned off at Swans have some connection to Washington, D.C., and a greater number to Howard University.
All right.
That's the origin of it. So that's the part of my lecture that I left out because I wanted to make it shorter. But that was my position when I spoke, is that Howard was really the seat. Before the Harlem Renaissance, many of those artists were making their way in the arts in D.C., and primarily because of the Barney Aiden collection, was the first historically registered African American art gallery, and Chicago had a great influence. Many of those artists migrated from Chicago to Howard, so know your history. And of course, you get your art appraised, and the appraisers, they report the market, they do not influence the market. They report, they research to see what the market is doing, and that is what their reports reflect. So, guidelines for collecting. Educate yourself through art books and exposure. Purchase through a reliable source. Because, I've heard the horror stories, and I won't go into them here, but if you want a private moment with me, I can give you 10 right off the top of my head, where someone thought that something was authentic, and it wasn't, because they thought they were getting that deal. Okay. Build a support team. Larry should be part of your support team. The appraiser should be part of your support team. Maintain and protect records of your purchases. And Larry talked in great length about that. Ensure your collection. Have your collection appraised and preserve it. Preserve it. Take care of it. You're the caretaker of it. Don't abuse it, because it does appreciate and value. But a torn up, raggedy, stained piece is not going to hold its value as greatly as a piece that's in excellent to good condition. Right. So I will end there, and we're going to now introduce Dr. Daryl Atwell, our first